On Christmas Eve, while the city glowed in celebration, a lonely man stared into the void from his luxury apartment. "Spending Christmas alone?" asks a gentle voice, breaking the silence with an unexpected offer. He refuses, but minutes later something inside him makes him grab his car and drive toward a humble neighborhood. What happens that night transforms not only his Christmas, but everything he believed about family, affection, and belonging. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's begin. The Miami skyline glittered like a jewelry box on that Christmas Eve, every building competing with its neighbor in a silent contest of wealth and light. But in one of the most expensive penthouses overlooking Biscayne Bay, darkness had settled in a way that no amount of money could chase away. Alexander Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of wine in his hand, watching the world celebrate below while his own reflection stared back at him with hollow eyes. He was 34 years old and controlled more money than most people could count in a lifetime. Sterling Global Enterprises had been built by his grandfather, expanded by his father, and now rested on his shoulders like a crown made of ice. Mergers, acquisitions, board meetings, quarterly reports. He knew these things like breathing. What he didn't know was how to walk into his own home without feeling like a stranger in an expensive hotel. The soft sound of a keycard broke through his thoughts. Elena Martinez pushed the door open carefully, her cleaning cart moving quietly across the marble floor. She had worked in this building for 3 years, knew every corner of this penthouse, but barely knew the man who lived here. He was always polite, distant, leaving early and returning late, sometimes not at all. She noticed him standing there in the dark, still wearing his suit from work, looking out at the city like someone searching for something they'd lost. Eleanor had seen loneliness before. She'd felt it herself after her husband passed away years ago, leaving her to raise their daughter alone. But she'd rebuilt her life around family, around Sunday dinners, and shared laughter, around people who loved her not for what she could provide, but for who she was. Something about seeing this man, with everything money could buy and nothing that mattered, made her chest tighten. She finished her work in silence, but as she prepared to leave, she couldn't help herself. The words came out before she could stop them, her accent soft, but her voice clear. "Mr. Sterling, are you really going to spend Christmas alone?" He turned, surprised anyone had noticed, surprised anyone cared. His first instinct was to deflect with some corporate answer about work commitments, but something in her eyes made him pause. They were kind eyes, worried eyes, the eyes of someone who actually saw him as a person instead of a signature on a paycheck. "I don't really celebrate," he said finally, which was true but not the whole truth. Eleanor shifted her weight, debating with herself. This man was her employer, technically, though they'd never had a real conversation. There were lines people didn't cross, boundaries between worlds, but it was Christmas Eve and nobody should be alone on Christmas Eve. "My family. We're having dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just food and noise and too many people in a small house. But if you want to come, you're welcome. We live in Little Havana on 7th Street. The house with the blue door and too many Christmas lights." Alexander felt something crack inside his chest, a small fissure in the wall he'd spent years building. The offer was absurd, inappropriate even. He should decline politely and let her leave. That's what someone like him did. Boundaries existed for a reason. "Thank you, but I couldn't impose," he said, the automatic response falling from his lips. Elena nodded, expecting nothing different. She wrote her address on a sticky note anyway, just in case, and placed it on the kitchen counter. "The offer stands, Mr. Sterling. We eat at 8. After she left, the penthouse felt emptier than before. Alexander poured another glass of wine, tried to focus on the financial reports spread across his desk, but his eyes kept drifting to that yellow, sticky note. He thought about his family, scattered across the country, all too busy with their own lives to gather. He thought about the women he'd dated, relationships that never lasted, because he could never quite figure out how to let anyone past the surface. He thought about tomorrow morning, waking up in this beautiful prison, going through the motions of another day. At 7:45, he did something completely out of character. He grabbed his coat, took the elevator down to the parking garage, and drove his Tesla through the streets of Miami until he found 7th Street in Little Havana. The house was exactly as she'd described, a small, bright spot of warmth in a neighborhood that felt more alive than any boardroom he'd ever sat in. He sat in his car for 5 minutes, debating, feeling ridiculous. Then he knocked on the blue door. Elena opened it wearing a flour-dusted apron over her work clothes, her hair pulled back, surprise and something like happiness crossing her face. Behind her he could hear music, laughter, children's voices, the chaos of a family that actually wanted to be together. "Mr. Sterling, you came. Please call me Alexander, and I hope the invitation was genuine because I brought wine, and I have no idea if it's the right kind." She laughed, a real laugh that made something in his chest warm. Come in, come in. Any wine is the right wine when it comes with good company." He stepped through that door into a world he'd never known existed, where the furniture was worn but loved, where people talked over each other because they had so much to say, where the food was simple but tasted like it was made with actual care. Elena's daughter, Sophia, a bright-eyed teenager, teased him about his tie. Her brother Marco told terrible jokes. Her mother, a tiny woman with steel in her spine, interrogated him about his intentions until Eleanor shooed her away with embarrassed apologies. Alexander Sterling, who commanded boardrooms and brokered billion-dollar deals, found himself laughing at a crowded table, helping wash dishes, and sleeping on a couch that was 2 feet too short for his frame. When he woke up Christmas morning with a crick in his neck, he felt more rested than he had in years. Over coffee, while the house slowly stirred back to life, Eleanor sat beside him, and they talked. Really talked. She told him about her dream of opening a small cafe, a place where everyone felt welcome regardless of the size of their wallet. He told her about the weight of expectations, about feeling like a number instead of a person, about waking up successful and empty at the same time. "Money doesn't make you happy," she said softly, "but neither does not having it. Maybe what matters is what you do with what you have and who you share it with." Her hand touched his, just briefly, just a moment of connection, but it felt like something shifted in the universe. Like maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than quarterly earnings and shareholder meetings. When Alexander returned to work after the holidays, Miami's corporate world felt colder than ever. The Sterling Global Tower gleamed under the Florida sun, all glass and steel and calculated ambition. His assistant, Jennifer Park, met him at the elevator with a stack of urgent messages and a worried expression that told him everything before she spoke a word. "We have a situation with the Meridian merger. Someone leaked the confidential terms to their competitors. They're threatening to pull out and sue for breach of trust." Alexander felt his stomach drop. The Meridian deal was worth $800 million and represented 2 years of careful negotiation. Losing it would cost jobs, tank the stock price, and give his critics on the board exactly what they needed to question his leadership. "Who knew the terms?" he asked, already running through scenarios in his mind. "Executive level only. You, Marcus Webb, Victoria Ashford, and your Uncle Richard." Marcus Webb was his closest ally, the company's CFO, and the only person in the building Alexander actually trusted. Victoria Ashford was another story entirely. Brilliant, ambitious, and carrying a torch for Alexander that he'd never acknowledged. She'd made it clear more than once that she saw their professional relationship as a stepping stone to something more personal, and his polite rejections had left a residue of resentment that everyone pretended not to notice. "Set up a meeting with Marcus and find out when my uncle gets back." "From Europe?" Jennifer hesitated. "He arrived this morning. He's already in the boardroom. He wants to see you now." Richard Sterling was Alexander's father's older brother, a man who'd built his fortune on ruthless decisions and zero tolerance for weakness. He'd been the company's president before Alexander took over, and he still chaired the board with an iron grip. He'd been the one to push Alexander into the CEO role, but that endorsement came with strings attached and expectations that felt more like chains. The boardroom felt like a courtroom. Richard sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit custom-made, his expression carved from stone. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I've been hearing interesting things about you, Alexander. Distracted in meetings. missing dinners with key investors, and apparently spending your holidays in Little Havana with the building's cleaning staff. Alexander felt heat rise in his chest, but he kept his voice level. I spent Christmas with friends. Last time I checked, that wasn't a corporate violation. Friends? Richard's laugh was sharp. The woman cleans toilets for a living, and you invited her into your personal life. Do you have any idea how that looks? What people are saying? I don't particularly care what people say. Then you're more naive than I thought. Richard stood, walking to the windows that overlooked Biscayne Bay. This company has a reputation to maintain. The Sterling name means something. We don't mix with the help, we don't blur lines, and we certainly don't give ammunition to people who want to see us fail. Elena Martinez is a good person who showed me kindness when nobody else did. If that's a problem for the company, maybe the problem isn't with me. You think you're the first man to confuse loneliness with love, to see poverty as authenticity? Richard turned, his eyes cold. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end whatever this is. We're going to review her contract and handle this situation quietly, and you're going to focus on saving the Meridian deal before you lose everything your grandfather built. After Richard left, Alexander sat alone in the boardroom, rage and helplessness warring in his chest. He pulled out his phone, thought about calling Eleanor, warning her. But warning her about what? That his family saw her as a threat? That being kind to him might cost her the job she needed? Meanwhile, across the city, Eleanor arrived at the Sterling Tower for her evening shift, unaware that her name had become a problem to be solved. Jennifer found her in the supply closet, her usual professional demeanor cracking with genuine concern. "Elena, I need to talk to you off the record." They stepped into an empty conference room. Jennifer spoke quietly, urgently. "The executive board requested your employment contract this morning. They're not reviewing performance. They're looking for a way to let you go without it looking personal." Eleanor felt the floor tilt under her feet. She'd known, somewhere deep down, that Christmas dinner had been a mistake. You didn't cross certain lines without consequences. She'd let herself forget, for one beautiful night, that people like her and people like Alexander Sterling lived in different worlds with different rules. "I understand," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for telling me." That night, Elena sat at her small kitchen table in her apartment, her mother and daughter both asleep, and wrote a message on her phone. Short, clear, final. She told Alexander that she was grateful for his kindness, but that she couldn't be the reason he lost everything he'd worked for, that their worlds were too different, and trying to pretend otherwise would only hurt them both, that she was resigning, effective immediately. She hit send before she could change her mind. Then she wrote her formal resignation letter and sealed it in an envelope. Tomorrow she'd leave it at the front desk and walk away from the Sterling Tower for the last time. If you were in Elena's place, would you have walked away to protect him, or would you have stayed and fought? Tell us in the comments. When Alexander saw her message the next morning, he felt like someone had reached into his chest and torn something vital loose. He tried calling, straight to voicemail. He drove to Little Havana, to that house with the blue door, and knocked until she answered. She opened the door just wide enough to be heard, her eyes red but her jaw set with determination. "Alexander, please don't make this harder than it already is. I don't care what they say. I don't care about the board or my uncle or any of it. But I do." Her voice broke just slightly. "I can't be the reason you lose everything. I can't be the excuse they use to tear you down. My world doesn't fit in yours, and pretending it does is just going to hurt us both in the end." She closed the door before he could respond, before she could see the look on his face, before she could change her mind. Inside, she leaned against the wall and let herself cry for the connection she'd felt and the possibility she'd lost. Alexander stood on the doorstep for a long moment, then walked back to his car. The Miami sun was bright and warm, but he felt cold to his bones. The penthouse he returned to was spotless, perfectly organized, and absolutely empty. Only the faint smell of cinnamon in the kitchen reminded him she'd ever been there at all. The crisis at Sterling Global deepened with each passing day. Meridian's legal team sent threatening letters. The board held emergency meetings. Stock prices wobbled. And through it all, Alexander worked with Marcus Webb to find the source of the leak driven by a fury that had less to do with business and everything to do with the fact that someone in his inner circle had weaponized information to tear apart more than just a deal. Victoria Ashford moved through the office with practiced confidence, offering sympathy that felt rehearsed, suggesting that perhaps Alexander needed to take a step back, let more experienced hands guide the ship through rough waters. Her concern rang hollow, but Alexander couldn't prove anything yet. Marcus, meanwhile, dug through access logs, email timestamps, and security footage with the determination of someone who'd seen too many good people hurt by corporate backstabbing. Late one night in Alexander's office overlooking the glittering Miami coastline, he laid out his findings. Victoria accessed the Meridian files 6 times in the week before the leak, twice after hours, and I found encrypted emails between her personal account and a consultant who just happens to work for Meridian's biggest competitor. Alexander felt sick. Why would she sabotage her own company? Because she's not sabotaging the company, she's sabotaging you. Marcus leaned back, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. She thought if you failed spectacularly enough, the board would remove you and give her the CEO position, and she was counting on the fact that you've been distracted lately. The Elena situation. The board knows. Your uncle made sure everyone knows. Victoria saw an opening and took it. The confrontation happened in a conference room full of Meridian's representatives, Victoria's theatrical entrance designed to undermine Alexander in front of the very people they needed to convince. She questioned his judgment, hinted at personal entanglements affecting professional decisions, painted a picture of a CEO too distracted by inappropriate relationships to lead effectively. But Alexander had learned something important from Elena. Sometimes strength wasn't about maintaining distance. Sometimes it was about being honest, being human, being willing to admit imperfection while standing firm on principle. He let Victoria finish her performance, then he calmly presented the evidence Marcus had compiled: emails, access logs, timestamps that told a story of calculated betrayal. The room went silent as understanding settled over everyone present. Victoria's face shifted from confident to cornered, her protests dying in her throat as Alexander's lawyers stepped forward to explain that this was now a legal matter, not just a corporate one. Meridian's team, impressed by the transparency and decisive action, agreed to continue negotiations under revised terms. Victoria was escorted from the building, her ambitions crumbling faster than she could process. That same week, across town in Little Havana, Elena's life was taking an unexpected turn. Her neighbor, Dorothy Henderson, a 72-year-old retired teacher with more wisdom than fear, had been pushing Elena to do something with her baking talent for months. "Sitting in this apartment feeling sorry for yourself isn't a plan, Mija," Dot said, appearing at Elena's door with coffee and determination. "You make the best pastelitos I've ever tasted. Your café con leche is magic. And your dream of opening a café didn't die just because you walked away from a complicated situation." Elena had been selling her baked goods at small local markets, more to keep busy than anything else. But Dot had taken samples to her grandson, who worked for a small business investment firm that specialized in community ventures. The call Elena received 3 days later felt like fiction. They wanted to hear her pitch. They'd tasted her food. They'd heard her story. They wanted to know if she was serious about opening a cafe that served everyone, regardless of income, a place where community mattered more than profit margins. Eleanor spent sleepless nights sketching ideas in a worn notebook, Sophia helping with menu designs, her mother testing recipes. The cafe would serve excellent coffee at fair prices, offer a pay-what-you-can breakfast program, and create a space where a corporate executive and a construction worker could sit at the same counter without awkwardness. Dot became her unofficial business advisor, reviewing her plans with the sharp eye of someone who'd taught economics for 40 years. Jennifer Park, Alexander's former assistant, reached out through LinkedIn after hearing through the grapevine about Elena's project. She offered to help with the legal paperwork and business registration. No charge, just because she respected what Elena was trying to build. The day Elena walked into the investment firm's office, she carried a simple folder and a box of her pastries. No fancy presentation, no corporate jargon, just honest passion and concrete plans. The investors were three young professionals who'd grown tired of funding soulless startups and wanted to back something real. They loved it. They funded it. They believed in it. When Elena got the news, she sat in her car in the parking lot and cried, overwhelmed by the realization that walking away from one dream had somehow made room for another. Dot cried too when Elena told her, hugging her like she was family, because she was in all the ways that mattered. The space Elena found was a run-down storefront near Miami Beach, a neighborhood in transition, expensive enough to be noticed, but diverse enough to be real. It had good bones, terrible wallpaper, and a view of the ocean if you stood on a chair and looked sideways. She could already see it filled with mismatched chairs, warm lighting, the smell of fresh bread and strong coffee. While Elena planned her cafe, Alexander was restructuring his life. He delegated more, worked fewer 18-hour days, started saying no to obligations that drained him without purpose. He walked through Miami without a driver, ate at small restaurants, sat on park benches watching people live their lives. He thought about Elena constantly, wondered if she was okay, wanted to reach out, but didn't want to complicate her life further. Finally, he settled on something simple. A handwritten note slipped into her mailbox, congratulating her on the cafe project he'd heard about through Jennifer, wishing her success, signing only his initials. He didn't ask for a response, didn't demand acknowledgement, just wanted her to know someone was proud of what she was building. Someone who understood how hard it was to choose yourself when the world kept telling you to be smaller. The note sat on Elena's kitchen table for 3 days before she finally allowed herself to smile reading it. The cafe took 3 months to transform from idea to reality. Elena worked alongside contractors, painting walls herself when the budget ran tight, choosing each piece of furniture with care. She named it Common Ground, a space where differences dissolved over good coffee and honest conversation. Marcus Webb, who'd become an unexpected ally, helped connect her with suppliers willing to offer fair terms to a new business. Dot recruited volunteers from the neighborhood to help with the grand opening. Sophia designed social media posts that somehow made a small cafe in Miami feel like a movement. Alexander heard about the opening through Jennifer, who mentioned it casually over coffee while reviewing quarterly reports. He didn't plan to go. Eleanor had made her choice, and he respected it. But as opening day approached, he found himself driving past the location, seeing the lights on inside, watching Elena through the window as she arranged tables and laughed with her daughter. Opening day arrived with typical Miami weather, sunshine giving way to afternoon rain that kept some customers away, but made those who came feel like they'd found shelter. The cafe filled with neighbors, friends, strangers drawn by curiosity and the smell of fresh pastries. Elena moved through the space like she'd been born to do this, greeting everyone with genuine warmth, remembering names, making each person feel seen. Alexander appeared late afternoon, when the initial rush had settled. He stood outside for a moment, watching her through the window, then pushed open the door. The bell chimed. Elena looked up from behind the counter, her hands covered in flour, surprise and something complicated crossing her face. "Alexander, I heard you opened today. Thought I'd try this famous coffee everyone's talking about." He kept his tone light, casual, giving her an out if she needed it. She studied him for a moment, then gestured to an empty table by the window. "Sit. I'll bring you something." The cafe had that lived-in feeling some places take years to develop. Mismatched chairs, plants hanging from the ceiling, local art on the walls, and a community board already filling with notes and business cards. A businessman in a suit sat next to a woman in hospital scrubs. Teenagers did homework at a corner table. An elderly couple shared a pastry like they'd been coming here for decades. Elena brought him coffee and a slice of tres leches cake, sliding into the chair across from him. For a moment they just looked at each other, acknowledging all the words left unspoken between Christmas and now. "It's beautiful," Alexander said finally. "Everything you wanted it to be." "It's terrifying," she admitted. "What if I fail? What if nobody comes back tomorrow?" "Then you'll figure it out. That's what you do." He took a sip of coffee and it tasted like coming home. "I wanted to apologize for the situation with my family, for putting you in an impossible position. You didn't put me anywhere I didn't choose to go." Eleanor folded her hands on the table, her voice steady. "That night Christmas I made a choice to invite you, and later I made a choice to walk away. Both were mine to make. I've been doing a lot of thinking since then, about what matters, about what I want my life to look like. I cut my work, hours by 30%, started actually living in Miami instead of just existing here, learned that being powerful and being happy aren't the same thing." "And are you? Happy?" He considered the question, really considered it. "Happier than I was, still working on it. Turns out you can't fix years of emptiness in a few months." Eleanor smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You know what I learned? That I spent so long being afraid I wasn't enough, when really I was just enough for the wrong things. This cafe, it's mine, built on my terms, reflecting what I believe. That's worth more than any paycheck." They talked as the afternoon faded into evening, about her plans to add a community kitchen for neighborhood cooking classes, about his work restructuring Sterling Global to focus on sustainable investments instead of just profitable ones. They talked about Sophia getting into her first-choice college, about Dot's ongoing matchmaking attempts with the bakery supplier, about the small ways life kept moving forward even when you thought you were standing still. When other customers needed attention, Alexander watched Elena work, seeing her in her element, confident and capable, and exactly where she belonged. When she returned to his table, he made a decision he'd been circling for weeks. "I don't want to complicate your life, Elena. You've built something incredible here, and you don't need me making it messy. But I also don't want to pretend that Christmas didn't matter, that knowing you didn't change how I see the world. So here's what I'm proposing. We start over, slowly. No pressure, no expectations. I come here for coffee sometimes. We talk. We see if there's something real underneath all the complications." Eleanor looked at him, at this man who'd learned to be vulnerable, who'd chosen growth over comfort, who'd walked into her world instead of demanding she fit into his. She thought about all the reasons it could go wrong, all the ways their different worlds could collide. Then she thought about the note he'd sent, celebrating her success without asking for anything in return. "I'm not looking for someone to save me, Alexander. I saved myself, but I could maybe use someone to sit across the table from, someone who sees me as a partner, not a project. That's all I'm asking for, a seat at your table, metaphorically and literally." She laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Then I guess you better become a regular customer. Fair warning, the Wi-Fi is terrible and the chairs are uncomfortable." "Perfect. I could use more discomfort in my life." As Miami's lights began to glow in the twilight, Common Ground Cafe settled into its evening rhythm. Alexander stayed late, helping Elena stack chairs and sweep floors, learning that sometimes the best conversations happen while doing ordinary things. When he finally left, he didn't ask when he could see her again. He just said goodnight and walked out into the warm Miami air, feeling lighter than he had in years. Elena locked the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment, allowing herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, two very different worlds could meet somewhere in the middle over coffee and honest conversation. Outside, the city hummed with possibility, with second chances, with the understanding that the best stories aren't about finding perfect people, but about imperfect people choosing to show up, day after day, building something real in the spaces between their differences. Dear listeners, we hope Alexander and Elena's story touched your heart. If you were moved, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode.